Hey guys, welcome back to Voice Bootcamp. My name is Faisal Khan, CEO and founder of voicebootcamp.com. In this video, I'm going to talk about elastic IP address. How often, if you ever thought about getting your own public IP registered address without paying a huge amount of money? Well, with Amazon at the $5 a month, you can get your own public IP address, registered IP address. But what do you do with it, right? Well, this video, I'm going to show you what you are going to use the public IP for. In Amazon, the public IP address is known as elastic IP. Now, with the elastic IP address, you can mask the failure of an instance or software by rapidly remapping the address to any other instance in your account. So the advantage of using elastic IP address from Amazon is that you can immediately move that IP address from one server to another server, and you don't have to worry about downtime and that much. I mean, it's very fast, it's very easy to do so, and you are paying for the IP address for free, almost free of charge, as long as you are paying for the instance. Now you can have up to 5 IP address, elastic IP address per account. If your account is very brand new, you're going to have a lot of restrictions. So you can have up to 5, but if you do need more and you can justify it, Amazon will increase your limit. Now overall, you do not try to use this public IP address unless you are absolutely needed. I mean, it's, at the end of the day, you have to, preserve the resources that you have. So although they can be free, or maybe for $5 a piece, you do not want to waste them if you're not going to utilize them. Now the question is, why do we need a elastic IP address to begin with? Well, first of all, the private versus public IP address. Now, if you are someone who has come from networking background, or if you don't, I would say pause the video, go and learn A+ or Network Plus or CCNA routing switching or any routing switching classes, because you would need to understand how IP addressing works, and you also need to understand how networking works in general. But I'm going to give you a quick snapshot. There are 2 types of IP address we have: a public IP address, which are address assigned to devices that are connected to internet, and then you get private IP address assigned to devices that are within your own network. Now, typically, if you are using a device with a private IP address, you will not be able to connect to the internet. In order to connect to the internet, you would need a public address. So what we do in our real world these days, we kind of do a conversion from a private to public IP address using a concept called NATing. Now, I don't want to go into NATing in this particular video. We have a video coming up for that, as somewhere later in the course. But in this course, what you will focus on is understanding what is private IP address and what is public. There are certain range of numbers or IP addresses that are reserved for private, and anything outside that range is considered to be public. Now, there are 2 types of IP address we have: IPv6 and IPv4. Right now, IPv4 is still the most common and widely used IP address, and there are about only 3.7 billion IP addresses that are available. Now, of course, we are running out of them in the future, or we will ultimately. There is a possibility that we're running out of them. So that's when the IPv6 was introduced, which basically is unlimited. Now with IPv6, it solves the IP addressing problem, as well as it is all the problem related to Internet of Things. Now in this video, or throughout this course, we're going to focus on IPv4 right now. We're not going to focus on IPv6. All right. So as I say, there are 2 types of IP addresses that you have. You got the public address that are assigned to your server, which you and I will use to access the address, as you saw in our previous lab security group, where I showed you how to use your own public address to access your web server. Well, that is a public address that was given to me from my ISP in Canada. But then in my office in Voice Bootcamp, we have a network with our own private address, and we can use as many addresses we want. We don't have to justify to anybody. We don't have to pay for anybody. We are basically the king of our own domain, and we can use whatever block of IP address we want. You want an IP address block that gives you 7 millions of IP? No problem. I get to do that. Well, with AWS, you also get to do that, but not million. I mean, there is a certain restriction. But in AWS, whenever you create a service, whether it is a EC2 services or whether it is a load balancer, what's going to happen is you're going to have to define an address, an IP address by default. Well, but the only way you assign an IP address is by assigning a private IP address within your network. So what you're going to do right now is that every time you create a virtual machine, AWS assigns an IP address automatically, or you can manually assign an IP address to your server. So that is within your cloud. Now you can communicate with one server to another server within your cloud, no problem, using an IP address. But the moment that server needs to communicate with the internet, now you need a public IP address. Now, by default, if you use a default subnet or default VPC, Amazon will assign you a dynamic IP address, a public but dynamic IP address. That means a temporary. And if you shut down the server and restart the server, that IP address will be gone, and a new IP address will be given. The problem with that, the dilemma with that, is that if you get a web server up and running with a dynamic IP address and you give it to your friends or family all over the world, or to your client, and suddenly you reboot your server, that IP address is gone, guess what? You're going to have to redistribute or re-advertise that number to everybody else. That's why we rely on a public address dedicated to our server, which will then be advertised to everybody else, and make sure that that IP address doesn't change. But here's the problem. Well, we cannot assign a public IP address within our cloud, within our VPC or private cloud, virtual private cloud. So what we have to do is that we have to create a mapping. And this is done using a concept called NAT, Network Address Translation. Now, we don't get to configure the NAT. The way the network is set up, when there is an internet gateway assigned to your network, AWS will assign you a public IP address and will automatically map to your private network, private IP. And I'll show that to you in a minute. Once that is done, every time that P server communicates with the internet, it will translate the private address to a public address, and it goes to the internet. Whenever somebody is trying to communicate with the server, the gateway that AWS provide to you has the automatically configuration done that convert the public address to private back to where the traffic originated from, or final destination. So that is what the private and public address is all about. Again, we're not going to go into too details about that, but give you an overview. A public IP address means an IP address where assigned to a machine that basically identified on the internet. The moment you're connected to the internet, you have an IP address. Every individual in the world has some sort of IP address that is to identify them, and it must be unique throughout the world. Okay, there is no way you can have a duplicate IP address on, especially in the public side of it. And they are geolocated. That means that there is a range of IP address assigned to, let's say, India, and there's a range of IP address assigned to Bangladesh or Canada, and you can always find out where that IP address is from by doing a reverse lookup. And then, of course, there's a private IP address. Now, private IP address, you can do whatever you want. You can assign as many times you want. You can have two networks with the same IP address. As long as they're not connected, no problem. Now, your IP must be unique within that given network. So let's say I have network A and network B. Both of them are private. And I get to choose same IP address on the left-hand side and the same address on the right-hand side, no problem. But the IP address within that side A must be unique. So that means that I cannot have .1 twice on my one particular network, but I could have .1 on this side and .1 on that side on the same subnet, as long as they're not connected. Now, machine connected to the internet must be converted to the public IP address. All right, so this is where the elastic IP address comes in. Amazon provides you a dynamic IP address registered, but it will change the moment you reboot the server. You get to assign an elastic IP address, your own dedicated IP address, which you pay for $5 a month unless you associate that IP address to a server. So you have the options to reserve like the 5, 10 IP address in advance and keep paying for that, not assigned to anybody. Or the moment you associate that elastic IP address to a EC2 server, it now becomes a free because you're paying for the your EC2 anyway. So by default, your EC2 machine comes with a private IP address and a public for www if it is enabled in your VPC. When you're doing SSH to your EC2 server, you're actually communicating with the public IP address, not the private, unless you're SSHing within the network. But whenever you're trying to connect to SSH to your server, you're actually using the public interface. If the machine stops and restart, that IP address can change. May not necessarily guarantee to change, but it might change. So this is where we assign an elastic IP address. So what I'm going to show you right now is how we're going to request an elastic IP address and assign it to one of the server that we have. All right, so as you can see right now, I am on my EC2. My EC2 is still running from the previous lab, and you will see that this is an IP address assigned to me, which is a public IP address. And on the left hand side, I also have a private IP address that are assigned to me. So if I shut down that server, reboot the server, this IP address may disappear. All right, so let's go and try that. I'm going to shut it down. So remember this IP, I'm going to copy that. All right, so I have copied that IP address. Now, what I'm going to do while the server is shutting down or restarting, whatnot, I'm going to reserve a bunch of IP, okay? So on the left hand side, you'll see something called elastic IPs. And I'm going to request 2 IP address from AWS, Amazon. So I'm going to say allocate IP address from Amazon pool, or you can choose your own pool if you have your own IP address, but that option is disabled because you have not configured your own pool yet. Some company do own their own IP block, but I don't want to go into that right now. All right, so I got, this is a IP address that AWS provided to me, and that is mine. All right, as long as I'm paying for it, $5 a month. I'm going to allocate a second one, and again you will see that 2 IP address will be assigned to me. There you go. I have 2 IP addresses assigned to me. They have a unique identification. They are 2 different subnet. You do not control what IP address you're going to get or what range you're going to get it from. It is all based on automatic assignment. Now the problem is I got the IP address, but they're not assigned, which is fine. So let's go back to our instance and see if I can restart the server and what IP address I get. So I'm going to go and start the server. It's going to take about a couple of minutes, so have patience. I will pause the video and then come back when it is ready. All right, so as you can see, the server is running right now, although it's still booting up, but you'll see the IP address right there that it is currently changed compared to what it was before when I copied it. So this is the IP address that I copied before shutting it down, and you notice how it has changed. Now I would like to assign my own IP address to this so that it does not change. What I'm going to do is on the left hand side, I will go back to elastic IP address, and I will choose this one, the 3.94.45.239, and I'm going to say associate elastic IP address. So I'm going to do that, and elastic IP address, I'm going to choose the server that is running, which is I only have 1 server right now, and IP address. Now this is what is important to understand. What I am doing right now by selecting an IP address right there, I am telling the Amazon AWS that, hey, I'd like you to map that public IP address to this private IP address, the netting. And if you check this option, allow this elastic IP address to be reassociated, what happened is I could come in another day and reassociate this IP address to another server while it is attached to this. You may not want to do that, so I just uncheck that for most reason, because accidentally if you reassociate to someone else or some other server, your customers might end up reaching that server, and that might end up creating a mess. So I'm going to associate. The moment I associate, I can go back to my EC instance. As you can see right now, the new IP address has been assigned. All I have to do, again, if I copy this address that was given to me from Amazon, and let's say I go to command prompt, let me bring you the command prompt, and I ping this address. okay, and I will see that IP address that I just selected. So now my server or my blog is actually using the elastic IP address that I am paying for or reserved for me. It doesn't matter how many times I reboot it or how many times I shut it down or reboot, I will always get that IP address unless I accidentally delete it or reassociate somewhere else. So that pretty much sums up the elastic IP address. Elastic IP address, remember, are public IP address assigned to any devices, whether it's a server, could be a load balancer, although you don't get to choose the load balancer, but it is something that you're going to need if you want to communicate with the rest of the internet. But keep in mind, not all servers, even those servers that are publicly accessible, require an elastic IP address, and I will show you how in one of the other video. Thank you for watching this video. I will see you in the future video. Until then, stay cool.